is Michelle Kimpton, and I head the DuraSpace organization. I'm happy to come present to you today, at least virtually, to give you a little bit of information about DuraSpace and what our roles and responsibilities are as it relates to DSpace, and then also talk about, in briefly, some of the interesting DSpace initiatives that are coming up this year that I'm sure that you will be interested in hearing about. For those of you that are not familiar with DuraSpace, we were formed roughly 4 years ago, and it was the coming together of the two open source projects, DSpace and Fedora. These were open source repository projects that were born out of academia, and instead of having those projects run by independent organizations, the powers to be felt it made sense for those two projects to operate under a single organization, and that organization was called DuraSpace. So DuraSpace has a mission which is committed to provide leadership and innovation for open technologies that promote durable, persistent access to digital data. So in addition to supporting and stewarding the DSpace and Fedora software, the organization also looks at other ways, other services and technologies that help achieve the goal of promoting and persisting access to digital content. We work almost exclusively with academic institutions, typically academic libraries, but also research groups, government, and cultural organizations. As mentioned, we support open source projects, but we also create services that help institutions persist and save their digital content. Our open source projects, as you're aware, DSpace and Fedora, and most recently we've also have begun a partnership with Vivo. Vivo is another open source project that allows researchers to easily connect and find research data across institutions. It's a semantic web open source application. So these are our three current open source projects that we support and provide stewardship to. We also have two services. One you may have heard of, which is DuraCloud, which is an archiving and preservation service. The second service, DSpace Direct, is new, and this is a hosted DSpace repository service that we will be running in Amazon. This is in beta right now. In other words, we have just spun this service up this spring with a few key institutions, and then we'll be launching it to the general public, meaning the academic, not-for-profit government sector, in the fall. So if that's something that you're interested in learning more about, please come talk to us. So today I'm really here talking about DSpace, and it is important to maybe understand the role DuraSpace plays in supporting DSpace. We provide technical leadership, and that is through the work of our technical lead, Tim Donohue, who will be talking to you after me. We do quite a bit of marketing and outreach for the DSpace platform. We do that by attending conferences, by producing brochures and literature, by having a website and a wiki. We also gather news and information that's going on in the community and make that widely distributed and available. We are the administrative and legal home for DSpace, so we make sure that the software is safe and secure. We also manage it in the source code repository. We manage the DSpace website and the DSpace wiki and make sure that those are up to date and current. We run a number of community programs. Some of you may be familiar with the DCAP program, which allows repository managers to give input to the development process. We run the Ambassador program, which allows new users to find other DSpace people in the area and connect with them. And we have a variety of education programs, web-based and wiki-based, to help you learn more not only about DSpace, but in general what is going on in the repository community. So those are really the core services that DuraSpace provides to the DSpace platform. The community plays a very significant role in supporting DSpace as well, and that is all of you, the institutions that are using DSpace. So for those of you that are new to DSpace, you might be surprised to find out that DuraSpace, the organization, actually does none to very little of the development, the coding of DSpace. We have one tech lead, that's Tim Donohue. He does some programming, but most of his time he's working with developers in the community and committers in the community to build the DSpace code base, to ensure that features and functionality are being built in unison for the next release. So the majority of the development and the coding is done by the community itself, and these are by contributions made through developers working in the community and committers that work together to decide what is going to be in and out of a given release and what are the features and functionality that's important. So this is an important point, because many times people confuse the fact that DuraSpace is actually doing the development, and that is absolutely not the case. The community does the development, and therefore the community decides what features and functionality really need to be in or out of any given release, because they're the ones making the contributions. We help do the coordination and the convening of the community to make sure that it happens. The community also spends a lot of time helping new users or existing users through the listserv, by inputting information into the wiki, by participating in user groups such as the one today, and they are the folks that are the representatives in the ambassador program that help bring new users on board. And lastly, the community advances the software through doing testing, giving input, and as I mentioned already, making code contributions. So it's an important partnership between DuraSpace and the community that DSpace continues to be sustained and advances with time. And without this partnership, the platform would not be able to continue to be so successful. The community are really the owners of the DSpace project, and DuraSpace is the steward for the DSpace project. And what that means is it's the organization that provides a home for DSpace, provides leadership, and has a place where people can come and convene and collaborate around the project. So a common question people ask is, how is DuraSpace funded? And I thought I'd take this opportunity to make it clear how we support the work we do for our projects and our services. So long ago, many years ago, much of the funding for DuraSpace came through grants and through institutions that were the primary developers of DSpace and Fedora, such as MIT and Cornell. That is absolutely no longer the case. In order to provide support for the projects, that's DSpace, Fedora, and most recently Vivo, money is raised through a program we call sponsorship. And sponsorship is where institutions that use these software projects financially contribute to the DuraSpace organization. And that money is used to pay for the programs and the people that work on those projects. Our services, such as DuraCloud and most recently DSpace Direct, that is funded through subscription service revenue. So what that means is if you use the DuraCloud service, or if you use DSpace Direct, you pay for those services, and you pay a fee, which is typically a subscription, that's annual to use those services, and you pay, in both cases, you pay for what you use in those particular services. So there's two very different funding streams that fund the work of DuraSpace. For projects, it's funded through the community, through the sponsorship program. For services, it's funded through the revenue which is generated from running those services, and those are two separate funding streams that fund the work in those two areas. So last year, which would have been this time last year, 2012, we raised $417,000, $417,750 for sponsorship, of which roughly $224,000 was put towards DSpace. That was money raised from DSpace users, the DSpace community, and $173,000 was Fedora, and then we had folks that just didn't support either platform but just gave money in general to the organization. And that money, that $223,000, was used to fund what we call two staff equivalents. So that's the equivalent of two people to work in the various functional areas: technical lead, community management, marketing, and then support. So your DSpace sponsorship, those dollars paid for really what we call two staff equivalents. It also paid for the upkeep of the wiki and the website. It pays for conference participation and sponsorship of various conferences, and it pays for any documentation or any materials we develop and any training that we do in a given year. So this year we've kicked off our sponsorship program. You may have seen emails about it. We typically kick it off in May and we run it through to October. So we're in the midst of our sponsorship campaign. So we hope to raise roughly $300,000 this year to continue to fund the current programs that we support DSpace with, which is the ones I've mentioned throughout this presentation. This year is really going to be a pivotal and exciting year for DSpace. DSpace, you may know, is roughly 10 years old, initially developed at MIT and HP, and we feel, as well as many others in the community, it's really time to start thinking about what the long-term roadmap is for the platform and the vision, particularly in the next 3 to 5 years, where it will probably need a fairly significant, potentially a significant architectural review and rethinking to make sure it meets the needs of our community 3 to 5 years out. So we have begun the work with the community to put together what a long-term roadmap and vision would be for the platform. And then from there, we will create a roadmap and potentially a work plan to start looking at what DSpace would look like 5 years out from now. So Tim will talk more about this, but we've just started this work, and it's a great opportunity to get involved and give your input if you are a stakeholder in the DSpace platform and you really want to be active in those types of decisions. Second, we plan on putting project governance in place around the DSpace project. So up to now, there really has only been loose project governance through DuraSpace and through the community, and we're going to formalize that by putting in place what we would call a project board, and these would be selected members of the community that would give oversight to the project, that would help raise funding if needed for the project. In other words, if we create a roadmap that's going to require significant development work, they would help find the resources to do that work. And the project board would strategically represent members of the community, so it would be geographically diverse as well as diverse in terms of the size and the scope of the institutions. So within the next really we hope the next 6 months will have these two milestones complete, coming up with a long-term roadmap and putting a project board in place. And Tim will talk a little bit more about certainly the first one, and the project board will be really in parallel to that. So how you can participate in the DSpace community. As an owner of DSpace, it really behooves you to get involved, not just use the platform, but figure out how you can become active. So first, and this is fairly easy because it just is a financial commitment, you can become a sponsor. So your organization, if they're not a sponsor, I recommend you think about becoming a sponsor. You can contribute any dollar amount and direct your money to DSpace. So we have sponsors that have contributed as little as $500, I think even less than that, up to $10,000. And that's an annual sponsorship. And then that money is used to pay for the staff and the programs that support DSpace. And you can check a box on your form to make sure that it goes to the DSpace project. You can become a contributor of the project. So the ways I mentioned, if you're a developer and you're writing code, if you want to become a committer, if you want to improve the documentation, if you want to participate on a listserv, these are all ways to contribute other than financially to the project, which are extremely important in the success of the project. And lastly, if you are an active stakeholder, in other words, you feel that DSpace, you really want to have input into what the future direction is because you have good visibility in terms of needs 3 to 5 years out, then you should really consider becoming active in the roadmap process and join or follow the group that is starting to chart the course for what DSpace will look like 3 to 5 years out. Okay, I want to thank you for your time today. I'm hopefully going to be here to take questions, and I think following my presentation you will be hearing Tim talk about in more detail about the DSpace current release coming up at the end of this calendar year, which is very exciting, as well as the work he's doing with the community to develop the roadmap. Thanks again.